No, that's really interesting. I think that's also important from a business standpoint, that artist understands that, there is more to it than just producing that music. It's like you have to have a persona, which is, I think, for us, how social media has become, has kind of filled that void, that you can really build your brand in a pretty easy, low-cost way.
Right.
Which is, I guess, to me, is really interesting.
And as you say, that's new, but from a legal point of view, there's actually nothing new in there. You're dealing again with publicity rights, the rights to your own identity, and how are you licensing those out, and in order to tap your revenue streams. And of course, you're dealing with the copyrights in what you're producing. But there's nothing novel legally about it.
Really?
What perhaps is the biggest change to me in terms of the legal effects is that so many much smaller deals are getting done now. In other words, people are doing deals at $200, $2,000 here and there, bits and pieces, where the legal fees for an old school agreement would have been more than the deal is worth. And so you're seeing a lot more short form agreements getting rushed through. Sometimes these are problematic because people can't afford a lawyer to look at them. But I find actually a lot of these are fairly balanced, especially from some of the younger companies that have actually had these agreements built to last and to service their customers sort of in a Web 2.0 vibe. I actually find they tend to be reasonable. Doesn't mean you shouldn't look at them very carefully, because they may not, even if they are reasonable, take into account unique circumstances. But on the whole, the big difference I see in the legal web is a lot more, or a lot less highly negotiated deals.
Okay.
Because you just don't have the resources to make it happen.
Absolutely.
And so more, hopefully, this leads to the emergence of more sort of standard deal terms that are reasonable and balanced, that are universally accepted.
That's interesting. So I guess going on the topic of contracts, do you have any tips, I guess, generally about how to protect
them? Negotiating the contracts?
Yeah, negotiate. I mean, these are small values, and obviously it's difficult to pay.
Well, I think what happens in this scenario, this is actually an important point, because it's clear that you're not always going to be able to afford a lawyer, and unfortunately a lawyer can't always afford to work for free. So where you end up is needing to, I think, avoid some serious red flags. The first red flag typically for me would be if somebody won't let you send it to your lawyer.
Okay.
If that happens, then leave the room immediately and don't look back.
Okay.
You may also find that you have a contract that's sort of a standard form, the terms and conditions on a PDF or something like that you get, and the implication is this is our standard form. There's no such thing. You can always change stuff. You're always allowed to push back and negotiate, make changes. You should never be pressed into feeling like this is a standard form, it's sacrosanct. There's no such thing. If they don't want to sign it either with your changes, okay, but never feel like you shouldn't be able to push back on these things. Other rule of thumb, I mean, it's an old saying again in the music industry, the only thing you should sign without your lawyer is your autograph. Don't sign stuff. If there's any doubt, don't sign it, because regardless of what you thought you signed, what you signed is what's written there, and it can be very hard to get around later on in perhaps years to come, where you have to try and prove what really happened, and the only evidence is a signed contract, which says something you don't want it to say.
Wow, okay. So it's good to take your time.
Take your time. If these guys are into you and they like you enough to send you the contract, they will work with you to get you comfortable with it. If they just want you to sign it and they don't want to talk to you, this is not a good relationship, most likely in the first place.
All right, well, that's good. Very, very helpful advice. So, I think another thing that we're talking about here is the idea that artists, it's more and more difficult for small-time artists to really be able to afford someone's legal services that you can provide. Do you think that there's a milestone or a point in which an artist can reach in their career when they say, I need to get legal services? It's like I can't do this on my own.
This is, it is actually obviously a huge problem, because the issues that you have and the needs that you have nothing to do necessarily with where you are in your career and your income. And the answer to when should you get a lawyer is the day before you start your music career, you should get a lawyer, because it's actually can be hugely important to have someone's strategic input. And I would recommend, if people are looking to actually take serious steps in terms of, putting together a band in a serious way, start to commit money to the project and go on the road and so on, it might be worth having at least a conversation with somebody to get an idea of some book story or some points of reference, so you understand what's going on. Because you can typically find that people will carry on with their careers and then they actually won't get back to doing fundamental things like their band agreement, like figuring out song splits on tracks that they've written together with people. You end up perhaps in a situation where one of these things becomes successful, and if you haven't worked it out, it can be a real problem, because as soon as something in the music industry gets successful, people appear.
Yeah.
And they appear with hatchets and knives expecting to get their piece, and if you're not ready, you can actually get torn apart.
Okay. No, that's great advice. I mean, I think it makes sense. If you're going to invest your time in this, you should at least be protected in one way or another.
No, if you just want to make music in your basement, that's easy.
Yeah.
If you actually want to deploy it into the world and make money off it and be sustainable, you kind of have to face down the business aspects, like any small business. I think that, it's a common sense thing, like with any other kind of business. At a certain point, it's too much money to bring someone in, but it is worth. I really do encourage people to at least consult with a lawyer as early as they can.
Okay.
And just have a conversation and start to understand some of the issues that they're going to deal with.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And I think, I guess there's different levels of agreement or commitment that you would have with a lawyer, but a conversation or something doesn't really take
that's
a huge commitment.
To be honest, I mean, in terms of commitments to a lawyer, there was sort of a tradition in the music industry of working on a contingency basis. So you would come as a band to me and say, we're a great band, I listen to your record and think, you are a great band, that's awesome, I want to represent you guys. You don't have any money, but I'm confident that I can go out and shop you a record deal and you'll get your $150,000 recording fund and I'll get 10% of that, and everyone's happy. The reality is, no matter how good the band is, I'm not looking at them thinking I'm going to get them a $150,000 record deal, so I'm not taking a contingency. The downside of that is that, most law firms will require payment now. The upside is that they're not going to lock you in. Because of course a contingency deal means that you can't change lawyers, you've got to stick with this guy right through that record deal at the very least. So typically there is no commitment when you're working with most law firms, certainly not with my firm.
Okay.
We would bill by the hour and we would bill for the work we've done, but if you wanted to change, walk out the door, then we certainly wouldn't hold you back, we'd encourage you to stay, but there's no commitment.
That's interesting, that's very